Imagine controlling literally millions of dollars, right? And you are solely responsible for the survival of like 500,000 desperate people.
Right, a huge responsibility.
Yeah. And you could have your pick of any luxury mansion in the city. But instead, you choose to live in this dingy fourth-class hotel room.
Oh, yeah, like totally by choice.
By choice. You own nothing, not a single brick. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. And we are incredibly proud to say that this deep dive is a part of the podcast Odomos Ichititu Historia, Odomos Ekititiketo Historia by Giannis Stefanidis.
It's such a brilliant project. And, you know, that paradox you just mentioned, a guy with immense power living in total poverty, that's exactly why we're focusing on him today.
Exactly.
We are looking at a very specific stretch of asphalt right in the center of Thessaloniki, Iasonidou Street.
Yeah, because usually when you pull up your GPS on your phone, a street is just this flat functional line, like turn left, turn right, and you're there.
Right, just a route.
Exactly. But if you actually stop and look, that flat line turns into, it's like a vertical archaeological dig. You are moving through, centuries of human triumph and tragedy and art and just everyday chaos.
Oh, absolutely. The layers are just incredible.
So today we are taking you on a chronological walk down Iasonidou Street. We're going to uncover the really cinematic life of the man it's named after and dissect this 14th century Byzantine masterpiece sitting right on its corner.
Which is stunning, by the way.
So stunning. Plus, we'll relive the kind of absurd glamour of its 1990s nightlife and figure out what the street actually feels like today. Okay, let's unpack this, because the sheer volume of history packed into this one neighborhood is honestly staggering.
It really is. It's a lot.
So let's start with the name. Who exactly was Leonidas Iasonidis?
Well, to understand the street, you really have to understand the demographic earthquake that created modern Thessaloniki. And Iasonidis is, well, he's the human embodiment of that earthquake.
Right.
He was born around 1882, or maybe 1884, in the Ordu region, also known as Kotiora of Pontos, right along the Black Sea coast. And by all accounts, the guy possessed just a staggering intellect.
Like a prodigy kind of situation.
Basically, yeah.
Yep.
He graduated first of the first in law from Constantinople, which is no small feat. And then he moved to Paris to continue his studies.
Wait, okay, so he's on this trajectory to be a highly comfortable, super successful European intellectual. He could have just stayed in Paris, right?
Yeah.
Drink espresso, debate law in Parisian salons.
Oh, he definitely could have. But then World War I breaks out, and the situation for the Pontic Greeks back east just deteriorates so rapidly, it turns into severe violence and persecution by the declining Ottoman Empire.
Oh, wow. Yeah, a really dark period.
Exactly. So instead of staying safe in France, Iasonidis does something completely counterintuitive. He leaves Paris and heads straight into the fire, literally to the Caucasus and Russia.
Wait, what is the mechanism behind that choice? How does a Parisian law student just, insert himself into a war zone?
It was driven by sheer necessity, honestly. There were about 500,000 Pontic Greek refugees fleeing Turkish violence, just trying to survive on the Russian coast.
500,000, that's a massive scale.
Massive. And they had no infrastructure, no representation, literally no one advocating for their survival on an international level. So Iasonidis steps into that vacuum.
He just takes it on himself.
Pretty much. In 1917, he founds the Euxine Pontus Union in Rostov. He essentially builds a political and logistical support system out of thin air.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and he is so effective at it, and such a huge thorn in the side of the newly forming Turkish national movement, that by 1921, the Kemalist courts actually condemn him to death in absentia.
Whoa, so he literally has a price on his head.
Exactly,
Right.
which forces him to relocate to Greece. Specifically, he ends up in Thessaloniki after the catastrophic Asia Minor disaster of 1922.
Right, okay. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, 1922 is the year everything changes for Greece. We are talking about a massive, deeply traumatic population exchange where hundreds of thousands of destitute refugees just flood into the country.
Yeah, Thessaloniki's population practically doubled overnight. The city was totally overwhelmed with people living in tents, in makeshift shacks, just an absolute squalor.
And this is where Iasonidis' story really locks into the history of the city, right?
Yes, exactly. He becomes a member of parliament. And then, crucially, between 1930 and 1932, under the government of Eleftherios Venizelos, he is appointed Minister of Welfare.
Okay, this is the part that completely fascinated me.
Yeah.
As Minister of Welfare, he is managing massive state budgets. He is the guy entirely responsible for the settlement and housing of all these 1922 refugees.
Huge amounts of money flowing through his office.
Right, and I was trying to think of a modern equivalent. You know, you hear about modern tech CEOs who famously take a $1 salary to show they are part of the team.
Oh, yeah, the PR move.
Exactly. But those guys have, like, billions in stock options and live in gated compounds. Iasonidis was actually offered the governor's mansion in Thessaloniki, and he just said no.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, his refusal wasn't just some PR stunt. It was a deeply held philosophy of solidarity. He lived in cheap third- and fourth-class hotels.
Wait, while being a high-ranking minister?
Yes. When he was in Athens, he stayed in these rundown spots on Athena Street. And when he was in Thessaloniki, he found similarly cheap lodgings.
That is wild. He gave his entire ministerial salary away. I read he funded student housing, like the House of the Akritas student, and just poured money into Pontic charities.
He really did. He chose to live in near poverty because the people he represented were living in actual poverty. He died penniless in 1959.
Wow. There is this famous quote of his that I think we definitely have to mention. He said, "May our throats run dry if we ever forget you, our paternal Pontic land."
It's powerful, and it perfectly encapsulates why the city chose to name this specific thoroughfare after him.
Naming a major street after him wasn't just a political favor then.
Not at all. Thessaloniki was fundamentally, permanently reshaped by that 1922 refugee influx. So by giving the street his name, the city was embedding the memory of that demographic trauma and the selfless heroism required to survive it right into its urban grid.
Man, that's a beautiful tribute. So, okay, Iasonidis represents this defining 20th century layer of the city. But if you walk down his street today, heading toward the intersection of Iasonidou Street, you suddenly hit a physical layer of history that makes the 20th century look like, recent news.
Oh, absolutely.
You find yourself standing right in front of the Church of St. Panteleimon.
Yes, a 14th century Byzantine masterpiece. It's so historically significant that it was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site back in 1988.
That's a huge deal.
It is. It's listed right along with other key monuments in the city, like the nearby Rotunda and the Arch of Galerius, which locals know as the Camara.
Okay, let's talk about the architecture here, because it is stunning, but I really need you to translate some of the technical terms for me. The sources describe it as a tetra-style cross and square church.
Right. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah. I know tetra means four, but how does that layout actually work when you step inside the building?
Okay, imagine walking into a square room.
Okay, got the square room in my head.
Now, place 4 columns in a smaller square formation right in the center of that room.
All right.
Those 4 columns support a series of arches and vaults above you, which are arranged in the shape of a cross. And then at the very center of that cross, directly above those 4 columns, sits the main dome. There's also a second dome over the narthex, the entrance area.
So the columns are literally holding up the center of the cross, which holds up the dome.
Precisely. And, in Byzantine theology, this isn't just structural. It's highly symbolic.
Oh, interesting. How so?
The building is meant to be a microcosm of the universe. The lower square represents the earth, the cross represents the transition or the spiritual realm, and the dome represents heaven, usually looking down at you with an image of Christ Pantocrator.
That is incredible, just the thought put into the geometry. And the outside walls, they have this incredibly rich, textured look. It's called Keramoplastikos decor.
Yes, Keramoplastikos.
Why did they build it that way? Was it just for aesthetics, or was there a practical reason?
Well, it's actually a hallmark of the Paleologan Renaissance style. During the 14th century, the Byzantine Empire was shrinking, and they were losing a lot of wealth.
So they were on a tight budget.
Exactly. They couldn't always afford massive blocks of solid marble or expensive ashlar stone anymore, so architects got incredibly creative with cheaper materials, specifically brick.
Oh, so it's brickwork.
Yeah. Keramoplastikos roughly translates to ceramic plastic art. They use bricks to weave these intricate geometric patterns, sunbursts, and arches directly into the exterior walls. They basically turned a budget constraint into a breathtaking art form that catches the Mediterranean sun beautifully.
It's so clever. Now, the building also originally had an ambulatory, which is like a covered walkway, right? On 3 sides. I know that part is destroyed today, though the 2 eastern chapels it led to are still there. What was the point of an ambulatory in a Byzantine church?
It served a dual purpose, really.
Yeah.
Liturgically, it allowed for indoor processions, especially during harsh winter weather.
That makes sense.
But practically, it provided a space for those who were not fully initiated into the church-like catechumens to participate in parts of the service without actually entering the sacred core of the nave.
Okay, here is where I have a major question, because the history of this specific building gets a little tangled.
It definitely does.
Right. The church we were looking at was originally called the Monastery of the Virgin Parableptos, or the Monastery of Kyr Isaac, named after a metropolitan named Iakovos, who founded it and became a monk named Isaac. So how on earth does a church named after the Virgin Mary, or an intellectual monk named Isaac, end up being called St. Panteleimon?
This is a perfect example of how buildings in Thessaloniki literally absorb the identities of their neighbors just to survive.
Oh, I love that phrasing.
That's true. So in 1548, during the Ottoman era, the church was converted into a mosque. It became known as the Ishaki Camii, or the Mosque of Ishak.
Oh, wait. They kept the phonetic echo of Isaac.
They did. They adapted it. And you can still see that Ottoman layer today. In the courtyard, there is the base of a demolished minaret and a marble fountain of Fayale that was used for ritual washing before Islamic prayer.
Wow, so the layers are physically still there.
Exactly. Now, the building operated as a mosque for centuries. When it was converted, the local Christian population had to scramble to save their sacred vessels and icons.
Right, they had to protect their heritage. Where did they hide them?
In a tiny hidden chapel dedicated to St. Panteleimon, which was located inside the nearby Panagia Church. Those relics stayed hidden in that chapel for nearly 400 years. Fast forward to 1912, when Thessaloniki is incorporated into the modern Greek state. The mosque is returned to Orthodox Christian worship.
And they needed a name for it.
Yes, but no one remembered it was originally called the Virgin Parableptos. The oral history had completely faded over 4 centuries, but they did remember that their sacred items had been protected under the name of St. Panteleimon.
Oh my God.
So they simply adopted that name for the newly reclaimed church.
That is fascinating. The building essentially takes on the identity of the place that kept its history safe. It's like an architectural survival mechanism.
That's a great way to put it.
So you have this solemn, quiet 14th century space echoing with Byzantine chants and the silent prayers of hidden relics. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, here we go.
Because if we fast forward from 1912 to the late 1980s, the soundtrack of Iasonidou Street dramatically, and I mean violently, shifts. We go from solemn monks to the absolute epicenter of roaring 90s nightlife.
We enter the era of chorus live.
Yes. In the decade between 1989 and 1999, the upper part of Iasonidou Street, right, where an old cinema called the LC used to be housed a venue that completely rewired the city's entertainment scene.
It really did.
But it didn't start as a typical sweaty nightclub, did it?
No, not at all. It launched in late 1989 with a highly sophisticated high-art theatrical music show. It featured the iconic singer Alkistis Protopsalti, with music composed by Stamatis Karnakis and lyrics by Lina Nikolakopoulos.
Heavy hitters.
Absolute legends. And crucially, it was directed by Andreas Voutsinas, a man with serious international theatrical pedigree. This wasn't just a pop concert, it was an immersive, avant-garde experience. The show was so culturally significant, they actually released a live double album of it.
But the cultural whiplash here is what gets me. You have this highbrow avant-garde theatrical space, right? And within just a couple of years, as we push into the 1990s, it morphs. It abandons the avant-garde and transforms into a hyper-luxurious bouzoukia.
Right, which is a massive shift. For anyone unfamiliar with the term, a bouzoukia, in the context of 1990s Greece, was a really unique cultural phenomenon.
Like, what even is that? Explain it for us.
Basically, these were massive, glitzy nightclubs featuring live Greek popular music. But honestly, the music was almost secondary to the display of wealth.
Ah, okay.
Patrons would sit at reserved tables, drink premium whiskey, and participate in this intense ritual of conspicuous consumption. Most famously, they would buy hundreds of trays of carnations just to throw them at the singers on stage.
Literally throwing flowers like confetti.
Thousands of them. And Chorus Live became the apex of this. It attracted the absolute elite of Thessaloniki, and massive celebrities would travel up from Athens just to be seen there. It was a high-roller VIP experience.
And did a huge star get his start there?
Yes. It served as the launchpad for Antonis Rimos. He started as a young secondary act on that very stage before becoming one of the biggest pop stars in the country.
Okay, but how does a venue go from avant-garde theater to throwing thousands of flowers at a pop star in just 3 years?
The evolution of Chorus Live perfectly mirrors the macroeconomic shifts in Greece during the 1990s.
A money change.
Exactly. The country was experiencing a massive, rapid economic boom. heavily fueled by an influx of European Union funds and a surging stock market. A new middle and upper class emerged very quickly.
And they wanted to show it off.
When you have new wealth, you need a place to display it. Traditional, modest forms of entertainment were rapidly upscaled to meet this demand for luxury. Chorus Live simply adapted to where the money was flowing.
But Iasonidou Street wasn't just for the ultra-rich in suits, right? The geography of the street allowed for total cultural chaos. Like right nearby on the cross streets, you had totally different ecosystem.
Oh, completely. It was a real mix.
Yeah, there were underground alternative bars. There were rembetika joints playing gritty, traditional Greek blues. Places like Minui near the Kamara and Major.
The street really acted as a cultural pressure valve. You could have the VIPs popping champagne at Chorus, and 50 feet away, students drinking cheap wine and listening to underground rock.
I love that.
It was a dense, chaotic hub where diverse, clashing tastes were basically forced to share the same pavement.
But the 90s eventually ended. The champagne stopped flowing, the economic realities of the 2000s and 2010s set in, and the glamour faded. Which brings us to the street today.
Right.
So what does this all mean for the modern urban landscape? If you were to put on your shoes and walk down Iasonidou Street this evening, what are you actually going to say?
You're going to see the mechanics of modern gentrification at work.
Naturally.
For a long time after the club era died down, Iasonidou became known almost entirely as a student street. Because it sits right near the Aristotle University and the University of Macedonia, it was dominated by an endless row of photocopy shops.
Oh man, the most unglamorous business imaginable. Just the smell of hot toner and exhausted students printing their master's theses.
Exactly. But urban environments never stay static. Those photocopy shops have largely given way to hipster culture now.
Of course they have.
Today you'll find modern, minimalist cafes serving local and imported craft beers. You'll find trendy restaurants with chefs in the back kitchens making quinoa salads and avocado toast. The aesthetic has completely shifted.
But from what I understand, it's not a sanitized, perfect gentrification. It's a very specific, slightly melancholic vibe. You walk past these modern bars, and you see people sitting alone, drinking an IPA, staring into their phones, or just lost in space.
Yeah, a bit of isolation mixed in.
Right. And right next door, a completely different scene. There's a detail from the sources I love about walking down the street near the holidays. You have the modern cafes with their fairy lights, and in one of the vintage window displays, someone has just placed an old Halda typewriter.
It's curated nostalgia. They're aesthetically framing the past. But what keeps the street grounded is that every day, gritty urban survival continues right alongside it.
Yeah, real life doesn't stop.
Right. There is a bizarre supermarket right there, serving the daily, practical needs of the neighborhood. The street signs aren't pristine. They're covered in thick layers of graffiti and Antifa political stickers. The youthful, raw edge hasn't been erased by the quinoa salads.
And the students are still there. That universal rhythm of student life is completely baked into the street.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially around the holidays, you can almost feel the collective anxiety of 1,000 20-year-olds doing the ritual, emptying their tiny mini fridges so the food doesn't rot while they visit their parents, unplugging the power strips and obsessively checking to make sure they turned off the water heater before locking the door.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that Iasonidou Street is the perfect microcosm of how cities actually evolve. They don't erase their past, they just build directly on top of it, creating these chaotic, beautiful collages.
Yeah.
The graffiti sits next to the 14th century brickwork. The quiet student checking their water heater lives in the exact airspace where the 90s bouzoukia once roared.
And we can't forget that the physical street itself carries literal scars. The road had to be widened and opened up around 1981, which fundamentally altered its shape.
Yes, big infrastructural changes.
And before that, the devastating 1978 earthquake left lasting impacts. If you look closely, especially near the Arianu intersection, you can still see where the foundations of buildings had to be heavily reinforced with concrete just to keep them standing.
Structural scars, political stickers, Byzantine domes, and modern cafes, all occupying the exact same geographic coordinates. It is a street that has survived falling empires, massive earthquakes, refugee crises, and volatile economic booms, simply by adapting.
It really is layer upon layer upon layer. So let's bring all of this together. Over the last few minutes on this one stretch of asphalt, we've traveled from the selfless, poverty-stricken heroism of Leonidas Iasonidis fighting to house a shattered population.
A true hero.
to the intricate, multi-domed architecture of St. Pantaleimon, absorbing the names of its neighbors to survive. Through the glittering, flower-throwing excess of Chorus Live, right up to the craft beer and graffiti of the present day.
It proves that a street is never just a way to get from point A to point B. It is a living, breathing archive.
Which leaves me with a thought I want you to mull over. We've spent a lot of time talking about how we currently view the 14th century. We put UNESCO plaques on it and study its brickwork.
Right.
But imagine 500 years from now. When future archaeologists decide to dig up Iasonidou Street, what are they going to define as our era's monuments?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Will they study the reinforced concrete foundations of a 90s VIP nightclub? Or the structural layout of a modern bazaar supermarket with the exact same reverence that we currently study the lost ambulatory of St. Pantaleimon?
It forces us to ask what we currently value versus what history will ultimately find valuable about us tomorrow.
It really does. And before we let you go, I want to remind you once again that this deep dive into the history of Iasonidou was a proud part of the podcast. Otwas echititiku udsoria, odromos ekitidikitu historia by Giannis Stephanides.
Such a great project.
It really is. The next time you walk down a street, any street, whether it's in Thessaloniki or your own hometown, don't just stare at the pavement. Look at the layers. Because that flat line on your GPS, it's actually a vertical dig just waiting for you to uncover its ghosts.